responsible transportation. Can we move to the title slide? So tonight's webinar is going to be Universities Hubs for Car-Free Transportation, and this webinar will be recorded so that you have it to share in the future if you would like. University campuses are ready-made spaces for multimodal and sustainable transportation in Wisconsin. Tonight we will explore how colleges are invested in making it easier for students and staff to be able to get around campus without having to drive their cars. Also, young people are already more attracted to car-free travel than older generations, and so having a car-free campus is excellent for them to develop habits in college that they can then use in life and create preferences that stick. Next slide. And so I'm John Levine. I'm a member of the Esther Fox Valley Transit Task Force, which is a part of the Coalition for More Responsible Transportation, and I will be MC tonight and leading the question and answer session at the end. I also work at the UW Extension Brown County as a 4-H staffer, so connected to UWGB's transportation and bus system, have used that onto the side of the campus. Please ask questions at any time tonight by typing them into the chat. We'll have a Q&A at the end to answer those questions. In case you are experiencing technical difficulties, please contact Peter Skopik by texting 847-687-7229 or emailing him at peter@wispirg.org, which is peter@wispirg.org. Those will also be in the chat for you to refer to at any time. Tonight's speakers are Mary Ebeling, the UW-Madison Commuter Solutions Coordinator, and she will discuss how UW-Madison designs car-free transportation options for students and staff. The second speaker will be Christina Zordani, a UW-Madison student who frequently uses transportation on campus. She will talk about her personal experience with public transportation and the benefits of transit for sustainability and getting around. And finally, Jim Kruger, who is the Transit Operations Manager at La Crosse Municipal Transit Utility. And he will speak about working closely with 3 college campuses, UW-La Crosse, Viterbo University, and Western Technical College, to ensure that the service meets the needs of the campus. The Coalition for More Responsible Transportation is a statewide coalition, and our vision for transportation in Wisconsin is that Wisconsinians deserve an effective, convenient, and clean transportation system that connects everyone to the places they want and need to go. The state's transportation priorities should reflect Wisconsinites' needs and focus on improving quality of life, creating healthier, happier communities, and advancing Wisconsin towards a transportation system that benefits all people in our state. And that means increase funding for public transportation, increase local road funding, and oppose unnecessary highway expansions. Some of the work that we've done over the last decade is we've organized media events, transportation reform summits, advocacy opportunities, and grassroots events across the state. Lastly, this is part of the CMRT webinar series, and we'd like you to save the date, Thursday, September 3rd, for our next webinar. There will be more information to come. And so before I introduce Mary, please, again, type any questions you have in the chat so we can address them in the Q&A at the end. And now I'll pass it off to Mary Ebeling.
I have to unmute myself. Sorry about that. Hi, everybody. I'm really glad to be here tonight, and thank you for the introduction, John. Next slide, please. So I just want to give you a brief overview of the presentation. This is basically the About Me slide. So if you're on a map, it's the You Are Here section. And basically, I basically have a master's. The most recent relevant thing is I have a MS in Urban and Regional Planning from UW-Madison from 2006. And I am currently the Commuter Solutions Coordinator at UW-Madison, although prior to that, I was a policy analyst for the State Smart Transportation Initiative, which is where I met Peter at WSPIRG. I also worked at Wisconsin Department of Transportation and the Rural Transit section, and as a program manager for the Non-Motorized Transportation Program in Sheboygan County. But the presentation outline I want to give you guys at this point is that besides the just about me, I want to just give a brief definition of what TDM is so that we're all working off the same definition. Thank you. Then move on to, and you don't need to advance at this point, but then the Commuter Solutions Unit and who we are and what our staffing is, as well as the context at the university, as far as the context we're working within to develop these programs. Then I want to do a program overview of the different modes that we support, as well as some of the results that we've seen through the programs that we're working on. And I want to give a brief caveat. I'm new to my job. I started in January of this year. So if I can't answer all of your questions here today, I will get your contact information and make sure to get those answers to you, anybody who asks questions. So let's see. We've moved on to the Transportation Demand Management slide. So we have a definition of TDM, but what does that actually look like in real life? And I think that's context specific. I think we're going to see that in some of the talks tonight as well. So next slide. Oh, and basically I'll just read this off though, just for everybody's benefit. The Transportation Demand Management programs seek to reduce demand for driving alone by providing attractive alternatives to driving a single occupancy vehicle to get between your origin and your destination. So we're now at the Commuter Solutions Unit. And Commuter Solutions is a unit within the Transportation Services Division at UW-Madison. And Transportation Services basically administers and coordinates all the transportation programs and services on campus. So one of their missions, strategic priorities, is to accelerate multimodal options at the university. That's where the Commuter Solutions Unit, where I am, comes in. And we have 4 full-time staff. 3 of us have master's degrees in urban and regional planning. We also have a large number of student employees, largely with the SAFEwalk program and some with the University Bicycle Resource Center. Next slide. And so some of the university context, which I think is really important here. We have more than 44,000 students, more than 22,000 faculty and staff, and up to 1 million visitors on campus annually. This is the normal numbers. You know, whether or not it's going to look like that this coming year, as far as visitors and whatnot, who knows? But this is what we usually see. And geographically speaking, we are a land-grant university. We're constrained. We're 1 mile by 3 miles. And we have a capped number of parking stalls at 13,000. And those 13,000 stalls isn't just 13,000 stalls that anybody of those 44,000 or 22,000 people can use. A certain number of those stalls are being used by university staff and facilities planning and management and the physical plant. So there's not even that many to go around. And we typically only provide parking for faculty and staff. Students don't get parking very often unless they're a commuting student. Okay, next slide, please. So these are some of the programs we support. They're probably not surprising, but they're incredibly important. The modes are transit, bicycling, walking, carpool, and vanpool. We have an employee bus program and a campus circulator bus. We have support, and I'll be talking about these individually as well. So if I gloss over them a little bit here, we'll get to them. So we also have SAFEwalk and emergency ride home programs, which are really important. And I want to talk about sort of the elephant in the room here that might come up not just with me, but with the COVID health crisis that we're facing right now. There's been a lot of discussion, a lot of hand-wringing over what might likely change as far as people's travel behavior and travel preferences. There's a whole lot of unknowns that they're sort of swirling around about this right now, and it remains to be seen how it's going to change. It makes sense that there might be a hesitancy of commuters to choose modes like transit or carpool and vanpool, where you have a whole bunch of people that you don't really know and you're all mixing. But at the same time, because we have established this limited availability of parking for people to drive alone to campus, I'm not completely convinced that it's going to be as dramatic a shift as we are, concerned about. But this is just me talking about it. It's going to be a little bit different in each location, but because we are so constrained as far as our parking availability, and we have a very robust transit, biking, and walking set of options, we might see people making choices that we otherwise, wouldn't. And if parking were plentiful and free, it might be different. But what I want to do too is, now that I brought up the elephant in the room, is I'm going to touch on how we're responding to the COVID crisis when I go over each of these travel modes. Next slide, please. So transit is the first mode I want to talk about. We have campus circulator bus, which are the 80 routes, and then employee bus pass programs that are available as well as Madison. With the employee bus pass, we have Madison Metro routes that are available, not just within campus, but in the larger Madison metropolitan area. And right now, our campus bus service is running on a recess schedule, which makes sense because we're at summer break still, but we anticipate that we'll be back to full service on our number 80 routes on campus by August 23rd. And one of the things we're doing, Commuter Solutions staff is doing, is conducting weekly counts of bus riders. I'm sorry, I'm getting a lot of noise in my background. But they're basically counting bus riders to make sure we have the ability to physically distance people on the buses. Metro has a 20-person passenger limit plus the driver on all of their routes, including their campus routes. So basically, we're assessing the crowding potential, and if we are butting up against that 20-person limit, we're going to have to think about options for what to do, because we still have to get people students and employees where they need to go in a timely fashion. So in addition to that, and I don't know what those options are if we're butting up against that 20-person limit, I don't know what it's going to look like. But some of the other options that have already been implemented is Madison Metro and the university are requiring bus riders to mask up when they get on the bus, physically distance. We have rear door boarding, which I think is a fairly common solution that's being implemented for a lot of transit agencies, and fare collection has been suspended. Metro has ordered plexiglass barriers to install between the driver and the front boarding area. And once those are in place, Metro will move back to doing fare collection again on their mainline routes. I don't know when that's going to happen. There's a whole bunch of we don't knows going on right now. Some of the other things that they're doing that are really, really good and proactive is they are basically disinfecting, sanitizing the buses every night. They're fogging them down with an antiviral. It's tuberculocolloidal. It's an antiviral fogger. It's got a big multi-syllabic name, and it basically it sticks to all the surfaces and kills any viruses it encounters. The buses are really clean right now. So next slide. We also have a very robust bicycling and walking program, and we've invested heavily in not just infrastructure, but in programming for biking and walking. And that's reflected in the university received a platinum level bicycle friendly community designation recently, and that's a pretty big deal. You can just count on a couple fingers how many universities nationally have that. We had invested in 2007 new sidewalks and bike lanes, 1.6 million in bicycle pedestrian path in 2008, 10 million for the bicycle pedestrian mall between 2010 and 12. I remember that construction. And we have over 9,000 bicyclists a day on campus. We also have a very, very cool University Bicycle Resource Center that supports current bicycle commuters, but also helps out with people who kind of want to learn more about biking, and provides maps and tools and training and all kinds of support to help people get more comfortable biking to campus. Next slide, please. SAFEwalk. I think many of us know what that is. We have, a customer calls because they feel like they need some support to get where they're going at night. We send out 2 safe walkers, which are student employees who escort the person, from where they are to where they're going. The COVID safety measures that they're doing is what we expect, and it's proven and it's effective, is they're masking up, social distancing, and we expect that SAFEwalk, which has been closed since March 18th, will reopen on August 23rd and be available for use. Next slide, please. Carpool Vanpool. I think we all know what those things are. And basically, what I want to say about that is carpools at UW are typically, we administer a carpool program, and the Metropolitan Planning Organization also administers one. But the one we administer here at UW, they're typically, although not always, between members of the same household, so the same safety precautions for COVID don't necessarily apply. But for the carpools and the vanpools in particular, we have multiple households. We have provided guidance, CDC guidance, so for sterilizing the vehicles, wearing masks, reducing the capacity of the vehicles, those sorts of things to increase people's comfort levels so they feel like they can still ride in a carpool rather than try to drive alone. And also the Department of Administration, which runs the Vanpool program, they have their own set of guidelines, which also follow. It's basically, you'll hear the same things over and over again because we know they work, the masking, the distancing, and whatnot. So next slide, please. This is kind of cool, the Emergency Ride Home program. Basically, if I decide to take a carpool or ride the bus in or ride my bike and something really bad happens and I need to get home fast, I can get a cab and I can go home, and I can, assuming I use one of 2 cab companies that are under contract with the university, I'm able to get reimbursed for that cab ride. So it takes out the what if factor. So you can leave your car at home and you can ride that bike to work. And then if something happens, your kid gets pulled out of daycare because they're sick, you can get home really fast to pick up your kid and take care of them. So that's a very important program. Next slide, please. And this kind of wraps it all into one big cool package. It's custom route planning we do for commuters. They can go onto our website and they can request information on specific types of routes and modes that they want more information on and assistance that they want transitioning to using. So it's all the different programs that we've been talking about. A lot of what I support is, especially right now, because we're ramping up for the semester to start, bike route assistance, transit route assistance, and how do I get my bus pass? Because our transportation services offices are closed right now because of COVID. So help them like click through the web links to order their bus pass. Or sometimes I've actually gotten on a call like this and we've shared maps and we make, okay, this is where you live, these are the transit routes, here's a screen grab for you, here's the route numbers you can use, and here's the times that they're run, or here's the bike trails that you can use to get from where you're going. And we'll talk about it, and then they have a confidence level that they can hop on that bike or hop on that bus and they know they're going to get where they're going and it's going to work out just fine. And it's really satisfying to know that you've gotten people to try a different mode of transportation and to be comfortable with it. And then they tell 2 friends, and then they tell 2 friends, and then it spirals, hopefully. So that's one of the things I really enjoy doing, is helping folks figure out a non-single occupancy commute share mode. Next slide, please. Got some results to go over pretty quickly. What we're seeing here, this is the student. This is our biannual surveys that we do, and this is a snapshot from 2012 to 18. And what we see is, although the walking share, which is the top line, is going down, and the bike share is going down, the bus numbers are going up, and we kind of think people are like really glued to their smartphones maybe, and so they want to be able to play around with those on their trip to campus, and so that's why they're choosing not to walk and bike and take the bus instead. Next slide. And our faculty and staff, the 50% line at the top is actually drive alone. But still, that's a pretty good number nationally. If you look at, professional adults and their commute mode share, 50% not driving alone is pretty huge. I'm still playing around with ideas for outreach to try to get that number down a little bit, but it's been consistent over time. And it's, like I said, it's a respectable amount, but we're always sort of looking to push the envelope a little bit. Next slide, please. This is the challenge slide. The UW hospital staff has a very different set of needs and hours that they work, and they don't necessarily mesh up well with the bus system. And they also tend to live a little farther away, which makes walking and biking more difficult. So this is something that I'm interested in kind of trying to improve, but since I've just started thinking about maybe the options, but I think there's a lot of good opportunity here to try to shift some travel modes on campus with it. And next slide, please. And you don't really need to ask me questions till after the end, but thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mary. Now we have Christina sharing her experience.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm Christina Zerdani, and a little bit about me is I'm a student athlete at UW-Madison, and I'm majoring in political science, environmental studies, and a certificate in public policy. So I'll be graduating in May 2021. And I'm interning with Whispered for the summer, working on public transit, as well as working on the New Voters Project to register people to vote, as well as working with 350 Madison, working on climate justice issues. And I'm at school, I'm working on the green sustainability team at UW-Madison to make the athletic department more sustainable by finding ways to reduce waste, such as within the athletic dining hall and transportation to and from events. So for me, growing up in the suburbs of Chicago, there was never really any public transit in my town other than the Metro, and that would be used for commuters to and from the city. But other than that, there weren't many other forms, or just like the school bus, kids would take to school. But my mom, with 6 kids, it would be a lot more cost effective for us as a family if she would drop us off at school. So when I got to Madison, I was kind of like, I didn't know how to work the bus system or anything, or with public transit. And there was always this stigma in place in our heads, kind of as children growing up, where I grew up, that public transit is associated with like welfare programs, and that if you can't afford a car, you use public transit, which obviously public transit then was never an option. So when I got to Madison, my older brother, who was there for 3 years on campus, suggested that using the bus system, so as it being the most convenient and accessible way to get around Madison. So I started using the 80, which is a bus route, and to go to class and practice, which dropped me off right outside of Nielsen, the 80, or there are other bus routes as well that would take you there. And it was really convenient, and we got there. I would take it with my teammates quickly and pretty conveniently. And it was also free because when in college, you're trying to save money. Then I learned, obviously, other routes. And as a student, you get a free bus pass in the past. So it was a lot easier to get to places faster once I knew that the 80 there were other routes other than the 80. And then I also would use the public bikes, like the e-bike, because in the nicer months, it'd be really easy to use those, and you'd be able to just use the app on your phone and then drop it off right. There'd be spots you could look up on your phone as well of where to put them, and you could put them right outside your classes, and you didn't have to worry at all about any maintenance or anything that comes along with owning a bike. And same with having a car, there's a lot of maintenance as well. So the bus system works well for that. And I've had friends who pay $200 a month for parking, which is also rather expensive. So overall, I just found it much easier to use public transit than having a car because of all the different routes and the frequency of the rides. That made it really convenient for us as students. So when I first started taking public transit, I was probably like a lot of other students coming from areas that public transit was not very much used. But over my time at Madison, I've really learned how easily it can reduce emissions by taking public transit, and you're not really changing much of anything in your life by using public transit. And a personal example for me is one day I was hanging out with people from my hometown that go to Madison, and we were talking about going to Hilldale, which is a mall a few miles off campus. When I thought, obviously, like, let's take the bus, because it seemed like a no-brainer, since we had bus passes and it would take us right there with a different route. But they still were like pretty unsure of using public transit because of growing up where we grew up, and they didn't really think of that as an option at all. So I actually wrote a blog post about this for Whispered, about the stigma of public transit, and they would rather pay for $15 for an Uber for one way than take the bus, which was free, which didn't, after being in Madison, didn't really make sense to me why you would want to pay extra money to drive in an Uber than use public transit when you're getting, it's the same amount of convenience. So that inspired me to write this blog post that explores the negative associations that Americans associate with public transit and different ways we could try to change the stigma. So this idea of the stigma of public transit and those who can't afford a car is reinforced by elected officials who often treat public transportation as a welfare program and then prioritize investments that support driving. So there's really no surprise that people might become more reluctant to use public transit if doing so is associated with welfare, especially considering the long history of social welfare stigma in the U.S. And owning a car, on the other hand, is considered a sign of wealth and independence, and it also is a status symbol that you've like made it in the world if you, depending on what car you drive, and that holds true in where I grew up. And like when you were 16 and you got a car or something, and everybody just based off what car you would drive. So changing deeply ingrained cultural notions and behaviors is very difficult and takes a lot of time, but we know that with smart policy decisions that make non-driving transportation options more attractive can help this issue. So, for example, in Seattle, there has been an impressive increase in the number of transit commuters, specifically with bus riders through different investments. And Bloomberg recently highlighted that expanding transit services with new light rails, a revamped bus network, and a voter-approved transportation benefit district, sprinkling transit stops within a 10-mile walk to more cities really improves the number of riders with public transit. So I think everyone should look to use more public transit because it reduces emissions. And as of now, transportation accounts for 29% of total greenhouse gas emissions in the US. And personal car travel is the largest subsource of emissions within the transportation sector. So to improve the quality of life in our communities and reduce harmful pollution that contributes to public health issues and climate change, we have to find a way to get less people off the roads and driving individual cars and more people around by foot and bike and public transit. So they found that people are more willing to use public transit if we provide better transit options and increase availability. So that, as talked about in Seattle, it's proven to be true. So with me graduating in May, I hope that I will use what I've learned in Madison to reduce my transportation emissions wherever I end up, if it's in a major city or not, but finding a way to reduce my emissions. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Can we go to the next slide, please? I want to add that Christina's experience extends across the entire state of Wisconsin. In 2019, Whispered Foundation conducted a survey of college students, and they found that how important it is for transportation to have multiple options, not just the automobile on campus, had a majority of students saying that it's somewhat important or very important. As well as after graduation, they still found it as very important or somewhat important in a majority of those college students and what they would like to get multiple transportation options and not just driving. So lastly, we'll have Jim speak.
Good evening. I'm Jim Kruger. I'm the operations manager for La Crosse MTU. Been the operations manager for about the last 5 years now. Been with the transit system for 25 years. Started out as a driver, and then I was a supervisor, ADA coordinator for a number of years, and then finally here as a transit operations manager. But my mission is basically to make sure that our system runs as efficiently as possible, providing service to the entities that we serve, whether it be through the UPass, which is what we call our university pass program, or whether it's that or it's other businesses throughout the community. And that's the key to the whole thing here is developing partnerships with your universities, with your businesses, with your shopping centers, trying to promote transit whenever you can, to try and create an outreach program, so to speak. Yeah, with our UPass program, which is kind of what we're talking about here today, or is what we're talking about. We've been doing that since 1999. I was the route supervisor out on duty during its fledgling years when we first started it. I can't claim all the credit. There was another gentleman here as a supervisor that kind of got everything rolling before I was a supervisor. Then when I became a supervisor, he left, and I kind of took over what he had started. So, but it's a very good program. One of the things that we see is transit, kind of like Christina was talking about. Transit does have a stigma to it, but we found that when fuel prices were exorbitantly high, a lot of people started to create choices of riding transit versus driving their cars. So they parked their cars and they started to ride the bus. And we kind of looked at that as a challenge, that was the time to try and sell what we have and promote what we have. And those people chose to ride with us. Now we had to rise up and kind of meet that challenge to make it a choice that they felt was good and that they were welcome and that they wanted to continue to do it even after the gas prices went back down. I think we did a pretty good job on that. Our ridership has maintained pretty well until like Mary was talking about the COVID thing hit, and then that kind of changed everything and how we looked at stuff. But the key is to make people feel welcome and invited and appreciated, I guess is the biggest word. And that's how we hope to change that stigma of transportation being that other transportation. We get a lot of people out there by choice, and so we, through good customer service and good routes and serving areas that people want to go, we can maintain those folks as riders. Students on our UPass program, I mean, some of the target destinations that they really like to go to, it's mom and dad that bring them to town on their freshman year of college, and they want to know what there is for transportation and do I have to send a car along. And so we're there with a pamphlet saying, no, you don't, because we're here. So once you show them that you can get to the grocery store, you can get to the shopping center, you can get to the mall, you can get to the shoe store, you can get to the movie theater, you can get to your job, you can do all these things with the bus. Then we start to form those relationships. There is another component to our UPass program, and it's called Safe Ride. It's a late night bus that we operate as well. It always got some other names that we very adamantly crushed whenever we could, and made sure that it was always called the Safe Ride. But that one, part of that was too, is making sure that people knew that the Safe Ride was there to get to work, to get to the entertainment locations, to utilize it for more things than just going downtown and that type of stuff. So, yeah, we found that the UPass is more about creating relationships and partnerships with the universities and with the students, and creating a good relationship, and that's what carries it out beyond graduation. So.
Thank you, Jim. Now we will have our Q&A. We received a few questions in advance that I will start with, but please feel free to put any questions you have for any of our three speakers into the chat. First question we received was, how should we deal with administrators who are not on board with alternatives to private car transportation? So I think this is directed at university administrators that may not currently have a lot of alternatives to car travel to their universities, such as commuter colleges.
I guess I'll jump in. You know, for us, we're really here in the city of La Crosse and cities on Alaska, French Island, La Crescent. We're blessed with a lot of support for transportation in our area. And we haven't faced a lot of opposition from administrators. I mean, a lot of it was building that partnership with the universities to get them to really want to promote it. Part of what they caused it from the UWL, just from the UWL's side of things, which they are kind of the largest participant in the UPass program, was that there was a shortage of parking on campus. So by doing that, we never had an experience where an administrator wasn't supportive of transportation. They looked at it as a good opportunity to get their students throughout the community without them bringing another vehicle in and creating congestion and causing more problems on surface traffic. So.
Thank you, Jim, on talking about that, creating that partnership over time with those university administrators. Also want to ask.
I'd like to add
Mary,
something about that too. I mean, we're in a different, our situation is a little bit different because that parking cap clearly had administrative support. It didn't just happen when we put the 13,000. This predates me, but one of the things I sort of learned recently. Not necessarily at UW-Madison, because like UW-La Crosse, we have constrained amount of parking and it's not going to get better. And that really, no pun intended, drives some of these decisions. But I think it's Seattle Children's Hospital, and they have some legislative mandates which changes their landscape and makes it a little bit easier for administrators to get on board. But when places like Seattle Children's or Oregon State Health University hospitals, when they look at how much money they're going to have to invest in parking versus how much money they would invest if they used alternative transportation programs, and knowing the numbers from other places that they can likely get success by investing in those transportation demand management programs, that can help sort of turn the conversation, and it has at a couple of these large institutions. So for whoever has asked the question, it might be worth like poking around a little bit more to get that information, to figure out how that was done.
Thank you, Mary. Our next question is addressed to Christina. How can we get college students to advocate for transit after they leave college?
Well, I mean, I think they have to first have the experience of taking transit in college. I mean, that's where I guess I learned how to use that and became more passionate about it. But like if they don't ever, if they just, I mean, you can just walk, I guess, around campus because Madison, but if you want to make it to your classes, it's not really possible sometimes. So you have to use other ways. But I think just like remember as like a student, for me, like remembering that there are other alternatives if you want to find them. So they just have to be willing to find different alternatives. Because I mean, when you first get out of college, like owning a vehicle is not something you really want to spend an expense on. So being able to find different ways to get around, I think could really, I mean, that could help.
Thank you, Christina. Our next question in the chat from James is addressed to Mary on custom route planning service in Madison. How much staff time does it take to respond to those requests? And what kind of demand is there?
The amount of time it takes to respond to the request depends on the request. I had one commuter who was coming from Barneveld, which is north and west of Madison, pretty significantly. It's like probably like a 20-30 minute drive. And that person wanted to be able to bike part way. So that took a couple hours. It took us doing screen sharing and talking about where the park and rides were so that she could maybe drive part way and then bike the rest of the way. Like I said, that took a couple hours. But if I'm helping somebody get a new hospital employee hire, get from Sun Prairie, which is a 10-12 minute drive east of Madison, to the hospital, that's easy enough because the Route 23, which Madison Metro just started, runs from Sun Prairie into town, and they can get to the hospital that way. That takes maybe 30 minutes tops if I'm having some issues talking with the person to coordinate. So it depends on the question. Some of them are super easy. How do I get from my downtown apartment to the hospital? That's a 5-minute answer. And I basically I'm able to just, using Google Maps, which is an amazingly pertinent tool for this, get them a couple routes, get some screen grabs, and say, here are your options. And this is how long it's going to take you. And here's the sticky points in traffic. And a lot of times, because I'm a bike and bus commuter myself, I can say, well, I've done this before. You probably want to take this detour route, take this alternative of the two that you're getting, because it's going to be quicker and it's going to be safer based on what you've told me you wanted. So it's not super time intensive most of the time.
Thank you, Mary. James provided a little bit of clarification. He said that he meant total staff time each semester devoted to that program overall. He wants to know if it's feasible to undertake with existing resources that he has.
Okay, so are we talking just about the custom route planning, or are we talking about the entire program? I mean, I'm the one who does the custom route planning answers, and that's just me. I've got 4 inboxes.
Just custom route planning. Just custom route planning time.
As far as percentage of my time, no more than 10%.
All right. Looks like that settled James' question. Another question we have is, how can we get transit agencies across the state on board with providing transit service, more transit service to college campuses? I'll say that again. How can we get transit agencies across the state on board with providing more transit service to college campuses?
Hey, the transit agency. I mean, UW pays the transit. We have a partnership and a contract with Madison Metro, and our bus passes provide, I think the fare is going to be raised, but I think it's been historically $1.25 per swipe on the card. And then the 80 routes are fare free, but there's a contract with Metro and they receive revenue for running those routes. So, because transit's not free, and they have to figure out how, in the university or the community just needs to figure out how they're going to pay, how they're going to work with the transit agency and come to an agreement on the type of revenue that's going to be supplied. I mean, Jim, what do you think?
I think a lot of it depends on how big of a support network you have at the university, the number of students that are interested in participating in the program. And if you bring that forth to the transit agency, yes, there is a contract in our situation as well. We have a contract with all three of the campuses, college campuses in our town here. But I think if you have enough support from the campus students that are interested in transportation or the ability to utilize transportation, take that to your transit system and ask them, hey, what can you do for us? We have X number of students that want to utilize the service, and any transit agency is going to want to try and help out in that situation, I think, because that's what we're all about, is moving people, mass numbers of people, and getting them to destinations of choice. So I think once you've established the amount or level of interest that you have from the university or from the community or wherever you're trying to serve, approach the transit system and start that conversation. And again, build that relationship. Find somebody that's passionate about transportation. Find someone that's passionate about getting to certain destinations of choice, and start the conversation. It all starts with the conversation and building a relationship. I'm all about relationships. So.
Thank you, Jim. We have another question addressed to you from Greg. Is there interest for weekend or late night travel to universities in La Crosse? Is there a challenge making those feasible with current funding?
Currently, we have late night transportation. And when you mean late night transportation, what type of transportation are you talking? Because our bus service runs from 5:10 a.m. to 10:40 p.m. here in La Crosse. And with our UPass programs for each of the universities, they are, through their contract, they are able to use that service unlimited for the hours that we're open whenever we run, just by showing their university ID. So we already serve during the hours of service, and then on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, we have that late night bus service that runs from like 10:30 to 3 o'clock between campuses in the downtown area and back. It's limited to that. It doesn't doesn't service our entire service area, but most of the businesses are closed, like the shopping areas and the grocery stores and that type of thing. We do go by a pharmacy and the hospital with that route as well. But yeah, I guess what type of late night travel are we talking about? And that's usually our only thing, is where do you want us to serve, and we try and see if it's feasible for us to serve that area.
Yep, that answers Greg's question. There's a follow-up for you, Jim, as well as maybe Mary. How do you make priority decisions with limited funding for campus transportation?
One more time on that. Sorry.
Yep. How do you make priority decisions with limited funding for transportation on campus? For you, Jim, as well as Mary.
I'm going to defer to Jim because I've only been in my position for 6 months and I haven't done any budgeting yet. And I probably would misspeak. So sorry, Jim.
Oh, that's okay. That's all right. Yeah, I shouldn't have said 25 years. Oh, man. When we make prior decisions with limited funding, I mean, for instance, we had a circulator route that initially was started that served the University of La Crosse campus area. And we were trying to build that. And they usually say in a cycle of 3 years, if you have a system or have a route that runs for 3 years, you'll get a pretty good gauge of what it truly is how it's going to perform. So that was a limited funding situation. And honestly, the route that was serving that area was underperforming. So given our limited funds for transportation, we felt that there were other areas in the community that we could serve better with that funding. And so when I actually was the interim transit manager for like 1.5 years, during my tenure as the interim transit manager, we shifted that route, the circulator route, away from the university area and into another area that was a kind of a food desert. And within 3 months, we bested the ridership that we had on the previous route where it was operating. That was a tough decision because of our limited funding, but we need to make sure that we're serving and getting people to where they need to go. Now, there still were students that utilize the bus in those areas that could then get to our transit center and then continue their trip on our regular fixed route to the campus area. So it's not like it was eliminated, but it was just a matter of, those are the things that we have to really consider, is that are we getting the most transportation bang for the buck, so to speak, and getting the most people where they need to go, and being good stewards with the taxpayer funds. So.
Yep, thank you, Jim. Our next question is for Mary. How does the larger Madison community benefit from having many UW students and staff using public transit?
Well, as Christina noted earlier, the air quality improvements of people not all driving their vehicles, the lack of roadway congestion, which makes it safer for everybody. So assuming that we're talking about commuters going from their homes in the Madison metropolitan area to campus for jobs or school or whatnot. I think those are the two big ones, but I think just managing transportation demand at the university benefits citywide infrastructure because you have fewer people putting pressure on our roadway network. And if we can have fewer cars putting pressure on the roadway network, it makes it more available to other users who might otherwise be intimidated as well, like bikers and walkers and people who might be more limited in their mobility. Does that answer the question, hopefully?
Yes.
Okay.
Another question for Mary from Mark. I would like to know if the UW statewide system has some type of master plan or planning policy that works with all the UW campuses to see how transit and transportation can better serve all of the UW Wisconsin campuses.
That's a good question, and I do not know the answer. If the person who's asking it wants more information, could they put their email in the chat box and you guys could send that to me and I can try to find the information? I haven't heard anything about it. I mean, we work on our own little pod typically of the UW Madison campus, but we are part of a broader campus community. I mean, have you heard anything, Jim, system-wide? You don't work at the university, so it's maybe not a fair question, but you work with UW La Crosse.
Well, yeah. With our connectivity at our transit center, we connect with the Jefferson Lines bus, and my children both went to UW La Crosse as well, so we got to learn about the Badger bus and a few things that connected all the various campuses throughout the city or throughout the state. Like you said, we all work on our nodes of transportation, and we try and make sure that we have a good system here. And then the interconnectivity, a lot of times we rely on those intra-city buses like the Jefferson Lines, the Greyhounds, the whatever other system, the Badger bus, to get people between the campuses. Like I know that twice a day the Jefferson line comes through La Crosse, and it usually picks up people. Badger bus, I don't remember exactly. It's been a couple of years now, but I know that they made connections between like Madison and La Crosse, and I know that they went down to just south and east of Madison.
Beloit.
Whitewater, yeah. So I know that they made a pass through here because, but that connectivity, I think we all specialize in our own little nooks, and I don't hear a lot about the bigger master plan, but.
Yeah, and I just, like I said, maybe it wasn't a fair question, and we have a lot of intercity bus going here too, which connects all the way into the Twin Cities with Megabus for us. But like I said, I do not know. It's a good question. It's a reasonable question, and so if I can get the person's email address, I will try to follow up on that.
Yeah. Thank you for answering about inter-university travel. I think it was also trying to get at how the university systems share ideas across campuses of how each university is solving transit issues. And so it would be great to follow up with Mark on that if he can get his email to you.
Yeah.
And we will do that.
Yeah.
And I know.
And so then.
I'm sorry. And I know in our system here, when we developed the UPass program at La Crosse, we were in conversations with UW Oshkosh. Stevens Point also wanted to know about our information, and UW Eau Claire. So there's a lot of communication with the non-university components of it. A lot of the transit systems in those municipalities will have discussions and kind of develop what works, what's a good plan, what's worked for you, what's not worked, and so you kind of get a good network there as well. So.
All right, and James has a comment that he might have a little bit of information on this question. The author of UWL Bike Friendly University Application, the answer is that there's no master plan, and there was a policy directing campuses to each develop their own, and that policy was stripped out of the state statute in 2014 or 2015. That's what James has to say. We have another question for Christina. Do you feel like the UW transit system works well enough for students? Is there anything you would improve about bike service, bike routes, etc.?
I mean, this seemed like probably the only experience. I mean, because when I go home, there's no public transit other than like when I go see my friends in the city. I think it's very easy to get around campus, especially like there are so many different buses that you can take, and there are always one there. So, I mean, I think Madison does a good job personally. And I mean, my mom went there, and she would always say like, oh, like there's bus system, like when she was telling me about it. So like it obviously like it sticks with people that there's a way to get around campus at Madison with bus systems. So I think they've done a good job. So I don't know what the second part of the question was, but I think.
Is there anything you would improve? About?
I think that the e-bikes was a really good addition, like in updating them, because the ones before, I would say they weren't very used, but now they did a good job of like, if you signed up and you were a freshman, they were like free, or they were like literally like $1, and then you could use them for a whole year pass. And I think those were always used. So maybe like just finding ways to put more, because it would be challenging to get a bike sometimes because there would be so many people using them. So, I mean, that's a positive. Like there are a lot of people using them. So.
Yeah, we're really lucky to have Trek basically based in Madison, and they are the manufacturers of the B-Cycle, which is the electric bike share. So it's kind of nice because we're a nice place for them to try stuff out, and we benefit from it as well. But yeah, we always want more of them. I remember having to pick up a friend or tell her where to park one of the shared bikes once so that I could go get her, because there was no place to park it, which was walking distance from our house. So I totally understand.
Yeah, I mean, it is nice because you do have the app for that. But yeah, like sometimes if you want to park it somewhere, it might be full, but I mean, there's another one that you can walk to. So
yeah, the ones on campus are close by each other.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so it's 7:30, and so we're going to be wrapping up. I'd like to extend a big thank you on behalf of the Coalition for More Responsible Transportation to Christina, Jim, and Mary for speaking tonight. We have contacts for all three of our speakers, if you'd like to reach out to them with further questions to follow up on what they said tonight. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with our coalition.